Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on difficult problems. And we are going to talk about dealing with critical issues and difficult problems in this session. So, this session has two main goals. First of all, I want you to recognize what a difficult problem is. So far, we've talked about the generic strategies, and my timing on the slide here is perfect. Defining the problem, diagnosing causes, and diagnosing solutions, and choosing a solution. That works traditionally. So when you're dealing with a very straightforward problem, perhaps dealing with employee satisfaction, but when you start to deal with non-routine problems, as we'll talk about in the next session, when you start to deal with problems that require more thought, and perhaps you need to look at where the definition of the problem lies, that's where these issues become more critical. If you can hear any noise in the background, there's like a party going on outside here at Nathan, so some guy wailing away on the guitar, so I apologise for the quality there if that's an issue. Okay, so defining the problem and diagnosing causes, diagnosing solutions, and looking at the way we choose things. This is what they call the traditional human problem-solving model. It was developed by Newell and Simon based on the Rand Corporation's work into systems thinking in the 50s and 60s. What this teaches us, though, is that there is a generic framework which we can fall back on when we talk about problem solving. We can look at the way in which problems are solved and defined. We can diagnose the causes, we can diagnose the solutions, and we can choose the solutions which we think are adequate. Now, what I want you to think about in this session is when you're dealing with a critical issue in your management practice or in anything, when something comes along and it's critical, and I'll run you through a case study in class, a real life case study that's happened to me as the deputy head of this department. So how would we deal with these issues? How do we deal with them with staffing? Like just say someone gets cancer, God forbid, or let's say someone gets sick, or there are some issues to deal with in the running of your business, perhaps. What do you do? Because a lot of the issues you're faced with, guess what? They don't have a definition yet, and you don't know what the causes are, and you don't know what the solutions are likely to be. So in this approach, you've really got to think about the way in which you deal with these things. That was my phone. There we go. I'll just turn that off. All right, so when we talk about real-world problems, it looks a little bit like this. This is the idea that you can take a philosopher, perhaps, and you can move them to any plate of shrimp through any connection, all right? What is it actually trying to say? It's trying to show you that everything is just one or two steps away. But often, you might be thinking, like you're looking at a fork dispenser, how do I get to a plate of shrimp? Or you might be looking at the plate of shrimp, and how do I get back to the philosopher? Now, it's a simple, very simple idea, but if you take the words out of that and you look at your job, let's say you're a sales manager, right? And perhaps you're looking at sales and logistics and you're looking at transport. You might be looking at your area only, okay? But there's all these other issues that are connected together. It actually looks a little bit more like this. I call this a Gordian knot. So it's an unbreakable knot. Now, this is what, in my experience, real-world management looks like. The linear issues like staffing and sales and all that kind of stuff, or procurement, supply, whatever the problem might be, those particular issues where you're dealing with the complexity and with the interconnectedness of things, they are the real life of management. In later sessions, we'll talk about linked issues and how one issue is actually linked to other issues. Like you can't just see things in isolation. A typical problem looks like this. This is what life is actually like. A series of interconnected rails, if you like, or a series of connected different elements. They're all joined together. And if you notice there on the slide, I'll see if I can get this pen thing to work for me. You see on the slide here, all of these little connections, these are my problems, all right? So let's just take an example for a moment. Let's just say that's my marriage, this is my job, this is my teenage daughter, this is deputy head of department, this is running 7106 RBA, this is running 314 RBA, this is staffing and retention, this is the dean, this is my head of school, and so on and so forth. So you see all of these connections, that's what my life's like, right? And that's what difficult problems are like. So for you, it might be, there's a sales downturn here, right? There's a sales downturn. Uh-oh. That means over here, I've now got staffing issues. I don't have enough salespeople. That means I'm not getting my sales out over here. Sorry for the crude, sorry about that. And over here, I'm not getting the return on my investment that I thought. No issue, think about this, no issue exists in isolation. In management, that is just not the case. No issue exists in isolation. It's a Gordian knot. You have to go into every situation and ask yourself a simple question. What else is this connected to? You need to see things from the biggest possible perspective, as we'll see in a later session. All right, problems have three types of structures. They have a good solid structure, so it's an easy problem. A structure with many possibilities or no structure. This is a structure with many possibilities. It's a Gordian knot. In this session, we're going to talk about complex problems and how to deal with them as managers. Especially, we're going to talk about dealing with critical issues and creating a strategic response to those issues so that we don't look incompetent, so that we can put a framework around a problem and have a structure for its solution. Now, the same process that we've talked about before applies, but there's a lot more impetus in this section, a lot more focus put into defining the problem. So as we go through and as we define the problem, we then look at possible causes. And what happens in complex problems is that we go backwards and we go forwards like that. So there's an iteration that happens as we go through, and it's iterated and we go through and things then lead on to the others. We also then iterate between these as well. We go backwards and forwards between these two until we come up with a framework which we think is appropriate. Okay. Whoops. Oh, yeah, good. All right. Scenario one. Let's just imagine you have a high staff turnover. This is a problem I've dealt with. Now, you have a high staff turnover. What's your thought? Well, this is a pretty crap place to work, right? You might think that. But then look at the industry. In our case, we have, I think it's something like 40% of our staff that teach in the department or in the GBS, something like that. 30% are casual. Now, if you don't put them on permanently, what are they going to do? They're going to leave. So what's your first thought? Your first thought might be, well, we look at the processes around the problem. In a complex issue, you look at the not the problem, right? So you start to think to yourself, well, what's the main issue with staff turnover? Well, people are leaving, obviously. So the next step is, okay, we try and put a frame on the problem, or we try to put the problem into a window in which we can understand it. And as we put the window over the problem, it becomes the way we see it. So if I turn around, like I'm in my office, I'm recording this, and I look out the window, I see people walking around, there's the union doing something, and there's a tree, right? And I look out the window, I see a certain view. Now, when we look at a problem, our perspective creates the limits by which that problem then has to adhere to. Or in other words, how we see the problem is the problem. So what I suggest we do is we look at the way in which we we look at the way in which we analyze a problem. We look at data. What can we learn to collect the facts about the problem? The process. What can we see now that this is evident? We see the problem's evident. We see it's in front of us. How can we then put a framework around that to understand it better? So we might call it the sales turnover problem. We might call it the staff leakage problem. Or we might call it that this is a crap place to work problem. Each one of those scenarios that I just sort of blurted out there are three different understandings of what the current problem is. It's all interconnected, right? All of those things could conceivably be true, but until we have the facts, we don't know. Now what we need to do, the second thing I would recommend, is look at the process. So if there's a high staff turnover, what's the process that they have to go through? So we look at the process, and we start to look at the way, or the steps that they have to go through to get there. So I would look at how are they hired, why do they leave, as the beginning and end of the process, and in between I look at their job while they're here. Maybe the job, they're working 90 hours a week and the job sucks. Maybe we need to redesign the job. Maybe people are leaving because they're getting better opportunities. Maybe we're like a halfway house and people are coming in and flowing out too quickly. So the third part then is we look at the people. And here's a little tip for you that I learned from what I consider to be a master problem solver who works at the University of South Australia, Mike Metcalf. He said to me, there are no problems where there are no people, and there are no people where there are no problems. Another way of saying that is all problems are people problems. Okay, let's just imagine, I'm not talking about engineering now. I'm not talking about technical problems. I'm talking about the workplace where people work. I'm not talking about a power plant where it fails and people die. That's tragic. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the day-to-day running of an operation where you have to manage people. All of those problems are people problems. So what we do naturally as people is we conjecture what the problem is. Oh, the problem is that Bob from accounting, who runs that department, is a total you-know-what. So no one likes to work for him, so they leave. So let's just say we remove Bob from the situation and people continue to leave. Guess what? Bob wasn't the problem. Maybe the job's the problem. So what do we do here? Well, we look at the processes around the problem. We look at the facts, the data. What can we learn? We make no assumptions going in. You've got to think like Sherlock Holmes a little bit. You make no assumptions going in. Process. What can we see now that it's evident? So now that we've looked at all of the data and the facts and we've considered it carefully, we look at the process around the problem. What are the processes? What are they? What steps do people take? What are their jobs? What do they do? Who do they talk to? Who do they interact with? Where do they eat lunch? People. What do people say that makes you think there is a problem? What do people say? What's their attitude? What's the morale like? How do they feel? What are the levels of empathy and connection like in the department or in the area that you're looking at? All of these things matter. People are holistic. You don't just go to work unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath and leave your emotions at the front door. You have a professional conduct, but you still get hurt when people say things to you. So that might be that this environment is a negative one. And a lot of research has shown, especially recently in neuropsychology and physiology, that the words that you say and the atmosphere that you're in affect your mood. So in other words, if you speak positively and you're in a positive, happy environment, everybody's happy and productivity increases. If you're in a negative environment, that negativity drives you down. So what do? We conjecture. We come up with likely solutions. Now, why have I said solutions? Because if we go back and we look at this, solution's the last part. But in a difficult problem, everybody wants to know what the answer to the critical issue is. What do I do about it? Now, as soon as you say the problem is, you have a solution, not the problem. You're telling me what the solution is. So let's say we're looking at this issue of staff turnover, and I've discovered that Bob is the problem. He's the central fact, he is the process, and he is the people that are, for better great English, he is the people that are involved in this situation. So what do? Well, we ask Bob to step down, we redesign Bob's job, or we look at the people around Bob and try and manage the problem that way. Maybe if we're a more harsh organisation, we performance manage Bob out of his role, which is terrible, but it happens. Okay, so we look at that, and then we're saying Bob is the problem. Bob is also the solution. Whatever you think the problem is, the flip side is also true for that solution. You're telling me what you think we should do about it, because you're saying, well, the problem is there's people leaving because this is a crap place to work. Therefore, we need to change the process. The problem is that Bob's a terrible manager. We need to change the people. The problem is we don't know why they're leaving. We need more data. And then we conjecture. It's natural. When we see the human mind works this way, I learnt this during an arduous PhD, which took me 4.5 years of my life. Whatever you think the problem is, the problem is. Whatever you think the problem isn't, the problem isn't. A blank slide. There we go. A better way to think about problems would be through this schema. There's tame and there's wicked. Wicked problems we'll deal with in a later session. And in the middle, there's everything else. Tame problems are easy to fix. We just ring someone, we email someone, we talk to them, we have a discussion. Wicked problems are you can't fix. You can only mend them, or you come up with a better solution. But with difficult problems, what you need to do is come up with a framework to manage them. We'll talk about that in the next bit. So what is a complex problem? A problem with more than one possible answer. There is an answer or a solution. There are many opportunities to solve it. The skill is in learning to identify the best or optimal cause, so you can identify the best or optimal solution. What does that mean? Let me break that down a little bit. A complex problem is a problem that has many possible solutions. Not just one, but there's multiple possible answers. The idea is to go back, just go back again, so look at go back and have a look at this. So look at the causes, right? Hang on, my pen here. Pen. We look at all the possible causes, and then we frame up all the possible solutions that exist. And we go backwards and forwards between these two. Because what we've done in the early stages of understanding the problem is we put a framework around the problem. So we put a framework around the problem, right? And then as we do that, we diagnose the causes, diagnose the solutions. We iterate back to the framework and we think, well, does this solution fit our definition of the problem? I reckon what 99% of people do is go straight to the solution without properly understanding what the problem is. They don't investigate it. Oh, I don't have time. Well, you're just going to live with it if you don't make the time. It's not hard to investigate a problem. You're just going to look at it, look at all the people, the data, the processes around it, and then come up with a reasonable solution to solve it once and for all. Okay. Oh, blank slide. Okay, so we can identify an optimal solution. That is the solution that is best or the solution that we can work with. But not every solution you'll find will work. Like there's utopian solutions, like what would you do if you had a magic wand? And there are dystopian or terrible solutions, like this is a mess and we can't fix it. Somewhere in the middle there, you're paid to deliver a solution. So the solution takes the shape of a framework. And that framework needs to be carefully explored and carefully managed. So as you manage that framework, you create the framework or the steps through which you identify the problem and work out the possible solutions as they come up. Then as you work out on that framework, what you do is you say, okay, I have a framework for managing this problem. And that's the best you can work with. Now that takes place through agreement often. If you're higher up in management, you've got to talk to stakeholders, you've got to get people to agree on what the best course of action is. And we do that through engaging ourselves in conversations and dialogue with people and talking about that. More on that in a later session. Now, for our first example, or second example, sorry, we look at traffic. Now, if you look at this picture here, you can see what the problem is. There's too many cars on the road. Now, that's a bit of sarcasm on my behalf, but in the face-to-face sessions and in the online wiki, we've got an example. You can begin to put your answers into what you think the problem may be. In this particular case, we're looking at traffic. Now, why does this exist? So I want you to think about, why does traffic exist? Now, remember what I said earlier. I'll go back. Look at the data, the process, the people, and conjecture what you think a likely solution is. Now, if you're online, navigate to the wiki, go into the wiki, and write down what you think the problem is and what you think an effective solution might be. In the face-to-face sessions, we'll spend about an hour on this problem. We're going to unpack it. And if you're online, you will have access to those recordings so you can go back and listen to what other people thought. But also, if you're face-to-face, why not put up in the discussion board a question and other people may respond to you. Okay, so you might want to pause the recording here, navigate to the course learning space, click on this session, which is difficult problems, press the edit comment button, go down to the bottom, and then there's a question, what do you do about traffic? Write in what you think your answer is, and then in class we'll discuss these as well. Another example of this, which you can also add to the wiki, and we'll also discuss this in the face-to-face class, is the difficult problem, but not wicked problem, difficult problem of prison overcrowding. What I want you to think about in between now and the face-to-face sessions is to think about possible, number one, the people, the data, and the process that are involved in this issue. So again, you might want to pause this, navigate to the wiki. If the heading's not there, you can add in the heading and talk about what the reasons are for prison overcrowding. Also a note, if you're a face-to-face student, you can actually go in and edit this and we can talk about it in class as well. Why not save yourself some time and do it that way? It is the modern world, people. Okay. All right, we should be back now. I apologize for this typo here. I can't actually find where I put the original picture for this, but anyway. What do we do though when we look at a complex problem? What's the process? Well, first of all, you've got to understand it. You've got to look at the knot, right? You've got to look at the knot of the problem. You've got to say, well, what is the problem? What is this knot? What are the connections? In a later session, what we'll talk about are the ways in which you can, don't pay any attention to that, in the ways in which you can look at developing solutions to wicked problems and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that a bit later. But what I want you to think about is a process that I've written about called adaptive problem solving. Now, what is adaptive problem solving? Adaptive problem solving involves understanding the complex problem, understanding the new frames for learning, and understanding the multiple concepts of the multiple concepts of the problem solution at once. What do I mean? Why do I call it adaptive? Well, first of all, a problem exists in a certain context, in a certain environment with people. What is the problem as they see it? I look at it from a learning point of view. I think people are stuck in the problems they're stuck in because they haven't learned their way out of it yet. And what we need to do is facilitate learning about that problem. As managers and problem solvers, we need to facilitate learning. We don't need to tell them how to solve it. As a consultant, I don't do that, right? As a consultant, what I've done in the past is I'll go in there and look at the problem, and then I'll spark the learning in someone to begin to learn the problem, begin to understand it, and then we want to go to the third step, which almost nobody takes. This is why this career is quite frustrating. Almost nobody takes. We want to develop multiple concepts of the problem solutions. That's multiple frameworks that we can draw from to solve the problem. I'll put it in plain English for you. If we look at a complex issue, what we want to do is inspire learning about the problem. We want to investigate the problem. That then leads to all the possible frameworks that we can use to instigate as processes that create the new situation. So in difficult problems, what we have to do is learn what the problem is. We have to create the frame or the window through which we intend to look at the problem, and then we have to then look at the multiple possible concepts we can use. Each concept will suggest a different problem solution pathway. And as that solution pathway rises up and it's before us, and we can look at all the possible concepts and solutions there, what we can do is begin to understand how those different concepts inform the problem differently. So what you can do, we go back to these issues, is for these two, the traffic and the prison overcrowding, is you can say, well, what's a new way of learning about this problem? So we might look at it from the social point of view, or from the justice point of view, or from the liberal right wing or Labor right wing point of view for the Australians. If we then we have to create a framework which we can adapt and do the solution. Now, why do I call it adaptive problem solving? Because you think on your feet. You learn as you go and you adapt your ideas to the problem and you begin to use new ideas and investigate that problem from every conceivable angle. And what I'm driving at here, which I think is an important process, is that once you've developed a frame for the problem to learn through, like you've set the boundaries on how far you can go, you can come up with thousands of different ways of solving it. And that leads us into the next session where we talk about, in the next few sessions where we talk about linked issues and how to deal with the political side of it. But dealing with a critical issue, there's one thing I can promise you, your boss will want a solution. Now, if you present multiple solutions to the people in charge, they get to pick one. If you're the person in charge, this at least gives you options. So don't just accept what people say, because what people say largely is crap. What you need to do is look at the complex issue and look at the frames through which you can learn it, and then take each one of those concepts of the problem and create some kind of adaptive framework to exist in. It's a very useful process, it's very helpful, and I've found this over the years to be useful. So I'll give you a quick example from my own life. I'm the Deputy Head of Teaching and Learning for our department. And by the time you hear this recording, it might be called something different. But whenever there's a major critical issue, like one of our staff members recently was put on leave for administrative reasons. Now, I had the task, he teaches 6 courses, of figuring out ways to replace that person. I had to go and find a strategy to replace this person. I've got a short-term strategy, I've got a long-term strategy, and I've also got a lot of different options that we could use, including online learning, outsourcing, and dealing with consultants, and all that kind of thing. So I have 3 solutions to the problem. My first one is just replace him with a contract lecturer. The second one is move the guy to online permanently and get other permanent staff online to come and teach his course. The third one is the dude gets fired or whatever happens, and we hire a new person by going to market. In the meantime, we go back to solution 1, which is using temporary contract labour. So these 3 possible, and there'd be 4 or 5 or 7 or 8 or 15 different solutions. The point is, I have to assess all of those solutions, pick the one which is the best, not necessarily the greatest, not the one that will fit the situation perfectly, because that's not always possible, but pick the one which I believe to be the optimal one, the one which will meet our problems and finish the situation so that we can move forward. Because one thing's for sure, students are going to be there when that guy's meant to be there. Someone has to be on the ground. How to apply? Well, first of all, in summary, this is what I've said. How to apply this to complex problems. First of all, you've got to know the problem. With a simple problem, the definition is there. So by way of explanation, you don't need to, I'm fading out a little bit here, you don't need to explore the problem in a tame situation. The problem's there, it's obvious, the definition is clear. But in a complex issue, it's a knot. It's a Gordian knot. You don't know what the solution is. You don't even know what the problem is, right? But what you do is you set up a framework for exploring options. You look at time, you look at linkages, politics, the connections between different parts of the organisation, you look at the processes, the people, and the data. After a while, what will emerge through your learning, this is just a learning process, will be evaluating possible solutions. Now, hey, what are you doing? Then when we look at those alternatives, we can create different schemes and frameworks which we can apply to the problem, as in what I said back here, and adapt that framework to suit the organisation. One thing I might add as a warning is you've got to select and adapt a solution to fit within a context where the people work. If it doesn't fit, then you have to embed a change management process underneath that to see the situation go from A to B. Without the change management, you won't get it to work. But if it's a solution that neatly fits and will patch the problem, then that might work. But if it's an alternative solution that's radical, then that involves massive change. That will involve top management buy-in, money, and all those terrible things. But when you set up a framework, you look at time, resources, budget, you look at linkages, and you look at all the possibilities that you can explore based on the data that you can collect. So you've got to explore first, create the frame for learning or the boundaries for that exploration, and then you've got to move forward with possible alternatives and frameworks. So what are these critical issues? Critical issues are those that are central to the purpose of business, issues that demand attention, the core business of what we're about. Critical issues cause critical problems. So strategically, core issues need attention. So if your core business is groceries and a problem comes along that derails that, it's a critical issue. We often, in the IT world, we often call these we often call these mission critical. So these are things that affect the core business. Now, when a critical issue comes along, we have to have a solution framework in place. It's a fancy way of saying we need a way to manage that problem so that we can do it. I mean, about 80% of what I do, I find, or in the past have found that it's an ad hoc query. It's something that I haven't planned for, that I have to have a solution for. And that's where the adaptive framework comes in. You can learn as you go, you can explore as you go, and you can learn as you find out. Are complex issues critical? Not always. Some issues can be put on the back burner. But when you're dealing with a critical issue, the same process that I've explained here applies, but it's in a much faster fashion. So there's learning, there's implementation, and then there's deriving the concepts for each one of the concepts to explore from the problem in more detail later on. All right. So to help you with dealing with critical issues and dealing with difficult problems, I've got a few clips from the movie Moneyball in the wiki. What I want you to do is to navigate to the wiki, take a look at those, and answer the questions underneath. What we'll do in the face-to-face sessions is we'll talk about these as well. Thank you for your time. In the meantime, I will cast the demon out of my PowerPoint slides, so the next one I record will not have these automated timings. I'll see you face-to-face or online. Thank you very much.